Hey, and welcome back to Thursday Night Live with the Soaring Profits Gang. Here we have three well-known profiteers, all wonderful people in their own right, experts. We have John Swales, who just recently finished his Bachelor's of Social Work. Tanya, who was on before, and she talked a lot about Red Roof recovery and cognitive therapy and how she helps people with addiction. And Bob McCabe, who is the creator of Recovery Speaking Initiative and helps men, mainly men right now, but is branching out to helping women who have gone through sexual assault. Today, we have a really important discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about addiction, the different kind of ways that you can, different kind of therapies you can use for addiction. Right? Specifically, in this case, we're going to talk about the 12 steps and also cognitive therapy. Now, there's many out there. And what you need to know, and what I keep on saying over and over again, you really have to find the right one for you. If the 12 step doesn't work, you can go to cognitive therapy. If that doesn't work, you can try someone else. It's just like when I talk about counselors, you go to your first counselor and you know what, you don't connect. It doesn't work. That doesn't mean that counseling isn't for you. It just means that that personal thing isn't for you, and you will find it if you seek. Welcome, Tanya, John, and Bob. You guys are like inspirational in what you do, and I can't say enough of how great I think you all are, and I appreciate you coming on to help people understand more about addiction and how to recover from addiction. I think best to start with cognitive therapy, because that's one of those things that not a lot of people know about. It's out there. They might have got glimpse of it, but didn't know that they did. And Tanya does a lot of cognitive therapy work. And I was wondering, Tanya, if you could give us a little kind of description of what cognitive therapy is and how you use it.
Cognitive behavioral therapy sounds very difficult, but it's really quite simple. Cognition is thought. So cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us to question our thoughts because everything begins with a thought. So when we start to recognize and notice the thought patterns that are not serving us in healthy ways, then we can intercept those patterns with different thoughts and new thought patterns to create new neural networks, new habits that will serve us in healthier ways. So I think it's something that is overcomplicated. It's just a very simple method to question everything that you're thinking. And I think it was introduced probably in the mid-30s. At the same time, 12-step programs were being developed. A doctor by the name of Abraham Lowe started to work with cognitive behavior therapy when really nobody knew what cognitive behavioral therapy was. He was actually trying to come up with an alternative method to shock therapy. He was working at a sanitarium, and shock therapy was not working, and he wanted to come up with an alternative. And he started to develop ways to encourage people to talk about what they were thinking and what they were feeling and describing the emotions. And then he wanted to create a legacy, something that could carry on after he shuffled off the mortal coil. And he created a very simple 4-step program that lives on as his legacy with something called Recovery International. So you can find more about them at recoveryinternational.org. But I think most importantly, the key, one of my favorite acronyms, is to keep educating yourself, because we are all different animals. We are addicted differently. We react and respond to trauma and life adversities differently, and we're going to recover differently. So the key, keep educating yourself until you find what works for you. And when you find it, do more of it, especially every day. Find something you can do every day and retrain your brain.
Well, I think you make a great point there, Tanya. First of all, thank you for joining us. John, again, thanks for joining. Bob, good to see you again, pal. Tanya brings up some great points there. Obviously, everyone's going to be dealing with these situations slightly differently. Bob, maybe you can shed a little light on some of the 12-step processes and the programs that are out there that some people might be a little bit more aware of, and how they kind of function.
Sure. Great to be here again. And John and Tanya, great to see you again. And always love to have these conversations and discussions with you. I am a member of 12 Step. I am a recovered alcoholic. I came into the program in 2010. So it's not only something that I love to share about and talk about, but I live every day. And for me, that was the path that I had to take, although at the time I didn't know that was the path I had to take, but it has worked for me. 12-step program, as Tanya referred to, started actually in 1935. Two guys, Dr. Bob and Bill W., Dr. Bob S. and Bill W., started this in 1935. There's a whole history that I could go into about it before then. But the two of these alcoholics got together. And the significance of them getting together was key in turning this thing into what we now know as Alcoholics Anonymous. Both of them were very bad alcoholics back in the 20s and 30s. And Bill actually got sober on December the 11th of 1934. And for 6 months in New York, he just pulled alcoholics and rubbies or rummies that they called them at the time, and alkies, almost off bar stools and into his home. And in 6 months that he did this, working with hundreds of alcoholics, nobody stayed sober. Nobody stayed sober. And he got very frustrated and decided to go back into his business and ended up in Akron on a business deal, which fell through. And at that point, he wanted to drink. He was 6 months sober. This was in June of 1935. And at that point, he really knew that he had to get in touch with another alcoholic to speak to. And the whole premise of 12-step is one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. That's at its core. That's where it starts. And so he and Dr. Bob, through a third party, were put together. And something really magical happened in that meeting. Bill brought a real understanding of the problem. And that understanding of the problem was given out by Dr. Silkworth, who was Bill's addictions doctor, a very renowned addiction doctor in the 20s and 30s. And with the understanding of the problem that when we drink, when I drink as an alcoholic, something different happens to me than somebody who is not alcoholic, and where they may feel a little impaired by it or tipsy, they'll stop drinking. An alcoholic, their reaction is they want more. And I get to a point where I just can't stop once I start, and I can't stop starting. And so when these two doctors got together, Bill brought the real definition of the problem, and Bob brought a definition of the solution, which is a spiritual-based solution. A lot of people say it's religious because God is mentioned. It is not a religious program. It is spiritual. Hopefully we'll get into some discussions on that tonight. And so with the two of them they started this program. There were two doctors that were vital in it, two other doctors, Carl Jung, who a lot of you may know, who was a protege of Sigmund Freud, and Harry Thibault, who was the head of a treatment facility, or an insane asylum, actually, at that time in New York. And then there was a group called the Oxford Group, which was an evangelical group, which brought the first 6 tenets. They worked with alcoholics at that time, and they had 6 tenets that they brought to bear for working with those alcoholics. And that's where Alcoholics Anonymous kind of got started in with them. Oxford Group really helped them and supported them. And then AA broke away about 3 or 4 years later, became its own entity, added another 6 steps to the process, where we ended up with the 12-step program. Fundamentally, 12 steps is I have to admit that I'm powerless. I have to see that my life is currently unmanageable because of, in this case, alcohol, or whatever the addiction is, whether it's drugs, gambling, eating, whatever the case may be, that I have to realize I haven't got the power to stop. So if I don't have the power, I have to find a power. And then I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to that power. That's one that really gets a lot of discussion going. And then we have one with some inventory that we have to do, and the admission of our defects of character and shortcomings, making a list of those we harmed through our life, and actually doing amends. And then 10 through 12 is really keeping track and doing inventories There's a lot for my own personal use. Prayer meditation is a huge part of my recovery that I do every day. And then the obligation in step 12 that as a result of these steps, I carry the message to other alcoholics. And I've had a spiritual experience, which is not a religious experience. That we can talk about that more, but it's fundamentally a different way of looking at this world. As an alcoholic and growing up and with other matters that happened in my life, I really was a supreme victim. And I was looking at the world that way. And a spiritual experience in my personal situation was taking that 180 and not looking at the world as a victim, but looking at the world as an eager participant and an equal footing. So fundamentally, that's what it's about. But man, that's really brief. So I'm looking to a robust discussion on it.
Well,
that was amazing, Bob. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate. Now we kind of have a floor to stand upon, in which everyone now out there can maybe understand a little bit better, a little bit clearer, both the 12-step program and cognitive behavioral therapy. John, I wonder if you can talk a little bit. I think it's important that we also see what are the roadblocks, what are the things that someone who is suffering from addiction faces when they're looking to get into a recovery program of any kind, and then we can go about the therapies and talk about how they work with that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanted to acknowledge Bob's. I've been around a little while in the 12-step protocol and the 12-step approach, and I have to tell you, Bob, you've nailed it. That was such an overview that it was. I'm not quite sure that I'm able to articulate it quite as eloquently as you did. On the other hand, I was listening to Tanya, and she made a comment. We're all different animals. I think that is a really important and poignant statement. And I remember, as I was going through school at some point, watching CBT. Or DBT is, there's a number of manifestations, but CBT is the primary model or modality. And I remember thinking that some of the approaches I took in CBT or that in CBT were actually stuff that I had applied when I was working my 12-step program. So, I think it's really important to recognize that we're not all on the same page. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. What works for Bob works for Bob. What works for Tanya works for Tanya. And what works for me works for me. And what works for you will work for you. So that's really important. I don't have a whole lot to say. I think, again, Bob nailed it. And Tanya, you nailed it, and I really think that quite interesting comments and statements were made by both of you.
Sure. So maybe Bob and Tanya, you could elaborate a little bit more on what kind of things do people with addiction face? Like what are they looking in for when they get into recovery? What's that going to look like for them?
Tanya, you want to start it off, or?
What's that going to look like? I'll give you an example of what it looks like. I had a client contact me to say, can you work with people who want to learn how to moderate? And I said, absolutely. In fact, I'd be very excited to work with you because you could be the first person to actually make it work and be successful. And then we could create an outcome study to show people that they can learn how to moderate. Because I have never heard of anybody being able to moderate what they thought was an addictive, unmanageable problem. Right. So therein lies the challenge with everyone, is that none of us want to accept that we have a condition that makes it impossible to imbibe poisonous substances and socialize like so-called normal people. It took me 8 years of relapsing in 12-step programs, and I blamed it on the program. And then cognitive therapy helped me start to develop emotional sobriety, to realize that it's my responsibility to do the work. And the work is to accept myself unconditionally, accept others unconditionally, and accept life unconditionally. And I still go to 12-step programs. I love the snappy slogans. I love the peer support and the fellowship. But a lot of what I don't like, I leave. Take what you need and leave the rest. And that's exactly what I do, because it works when you work it. I think 12 steps, it's one of the best personal development programs on the planet. And, you know, I even had a sponsor who ended up being a child molester and used that as an excuse to go back and relapse. It's like, oh my God, everybody is shit. Like, I have such a poor judge of character. And, why is she even presenting herself to be a sponsor? Blah, 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 right? The shoulds and the masturbations about how society should behave. So it's a matter of progress, not perfection. We progress through life and learn how to deal with life adversities without taking substances and adapting behaviors that are harmful. And it's a journey of not just recovery, but discovery.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So I've never been addicted to drugs or alcohol, but my problem was I was addicted to food. I was a very large man, and I would eat leadenly. Yes, I would like eat and eat and eat. I'd have pizza and chips, and then go reach for some more. And it was always someone else's fault. It was always, I had a bad day, something happened at work. It was always someone else's fault. Until I really did the work of looking inside and starting to see why I was doing what I was doing, what was the reason behind it, and really understanding my own feelings around food, what it was bringing me, how it was changing, how I felt that it was making my life better when clearly it wasn't. And it took a while to put that all together and go back through my past at times when food became so important to me, and really understand what my triggers were, which I know you guys are talking about a whole other level, but I'm talking about like a micro addiction of food eating, which was very serious for me. Like I was basically eating myself to death for a while. But yeah, no, you really do have to understand yourself. You have to take ownership. You have to, stop blaming the outside world and start looking internal and seeing what you need to do to change. John?
I wanted to just make reference, James, to your comment. I think that we should never minimize what another person's coping with. You had an addiction that manifested itself through food. That is a really serious affliction.
Yep.
And it's not to be trivialized or dismissed. So I think that would be one of the hopes that I have that comes from this conversation tonight, is that people identify, and I think Tanya said it herself, take what works for you and leave the rest. I mean, I think it's really important to identify with whatever's being said here tonight, and rather than saying, well, in the microcosm of things, I'm going to say that's not true. I think that how it's impacted you, your food, has been a big deal. So I just wanted to call you out on that. That's all.
True. Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, I think I'd like to ask a question of Tanya, but just before I do, I think we also have to look at the individual. And there's 12-step programs in a lot of things, gamblers, overeaters, whatever. But I can only speak really to my personal experience. So please understand, it's coming from my experience. Yeah. I'm not speaking as an expert on 12-step. It's solely my experience. And I want to look at the person before they come in. When I came in to a 12-step program in 2010, man, I was broken. I was done. I was at the point I wanted to commit suicide. I didn't have the courage to even do that. I thought of myself as a failure in life, a failure in death, because as a man, I couldn't do it, as a failure as a father, and all of those things. And that mental place that I was in was completely consuming me, and there was no way out. And when I came into 12 step, it really wasn't a choice of mine. I didn't want to go to treatment. I didn't want to go to recovery. I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted out of this place you call life. So I was going to drink myself out. And there really was something that came between me and booze. And I don't know what it was, but I know it was significant. And I know it was life-changing moment. It was a moment of clarity. And I hear that a lot. And Tanya, you would have heard it a lot, not only in the rooms of AA, but also in your own work and what you're doing. That change that happens to somebody. And I guess where I'm coming from and what I'd like to ask Tanya, first of all, you mentioned that you blame the program, but I think I took that as it wasn't the program, but maybe it just wasn't the right fit, or were you blaming the actual 12-step program? Because I just want to clarify, because I'm not quite sure. I think I know what you mean, but I just wanted to make sure.
I blamed the program for my relapses.
And you still do to this day?
Oh gosh, no.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought you meant, Tanya. But and everybody, I love Tanya and I love John. I'm really close to him. So this isn't argumentative, but I just really had to understand because I wasn't quite sure.
No, I relapsed every year for 8 years attending 12-step meetings. So from, where I was coming from, my ego and the way my mind was working at the time, the stinking thinking, was that, oh, this is not working for me. So it's the program's fault. It's not my fault. I'm doing all the work. I'm doing what they're telling me to do. I did a 4th and 5th. I'm following the steps and it's not working. Instead of doing that inner reflection, right? Wasn't it one of the disciples who said, all of the answers we seek lie within? But nobody wants to take that journey within, to go deep into the crevices of our psyche.
Well, if I can, one of the themes that I'm starting to pick up here, Tanya, is that the cognition-based therapy tends to be more interpersonal. Like you're diving deep into yourself. Where, Bob, if I can, the 12-step tends to be more of a community. You're joining into a group of people and looking for some of that as well. Is there anything you guys can speak on in regards to that?
The 12-step program, at least AA's program, if you will, the drinking program, is a 3-sided program. You got unity, you have service, and you have recovery. Unity is going to the meetings. Very important. Very important. For this alcoholic, I'll tell you right now, to stop drinking and just go to meetings would not have worked. You'd have to have somebody else on this panel, because this guy would either be out on the streets drunk right now or dead. I needed that process of what it means to do the work and that process of going through the steps and what it means in step 1 to be powerless, and how is your life unmanageable because of the addiction. And I really don't find, when I work with people in treatment centers and from all crosses, steps 1, 2, and 3 usually are not the big hitters, or steps 1 and 2 are not the big hitters. It's when we get to step 3 and the G word comes out that all of a sudden there's a real problem. And that's the kind of the elephant in the room, if you will, I think, Tanya, that, and if you hear negative comments about 12-step, it's about the fact that it's a religious program. It's a religious cult. They're pushing God on you. And it's not. It's just not that. And I could go on for a long time on it, but I'm not going to go there unless you want to have that discussion.
Well, so Bob, I think that there's something there, because, my limited understanding of the program is that you have to find power outside of yourself.
That's right.
Am I wrong in saying that?
You are absolutely correct.
Right. So, okay. So the 12-step is using that, is that you have to have some higher power, higher being, higher, whatever you want to call it in your spiritual or your religious faith. Yep. So Tanya, in that type of situation, what does cognitive behavioral therapy say? How do you take that existential force and relate it back to a behavioral therapy?
Well, Bob is absolutely right. Most people don't like 12-step programs because they feel it's a God-focused program, and it's not a God-focused program. It's a individually focused program that helps you accept your condition for what it is. And like I said, I love the snappy slogans of 12-step programs because I'm pretty sure that the guy who was playing around and developing cognitive therapy, Dr. Abraham Lowe, was probably a friend of Dr. Bob and Bill, because there's definitely some crossovers that I see with cognitive therapies. And John had mentioned DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and there are so many tools to use in life and recovery. I think my understanding of dialectical behavioral therapy is that it's really cognitive therapy with a bit of mindfulness mixed in with it. But I mentioned that it took me 8 years of relapsing to finally accept that I couldn't moderate my intake of alcohol and drugs. I needed to find other ways to manage those heightened feelings and emotions of, anger, fear, uncertainty, anxiety, depression. And, when I think back to 2009, I was living in absolute desperation of wanting to get myself out of this self-destructive cycle of drinking and drugging. And I couldn't imagine achieving freedom from this insanity. I would walk toward a bottle of vodka and say to myself, this is effing insane. What are you doing? You're an intelligent woman. You're killing yourself. It doesn't make any sense. And it didn't matter. I would still watch my arm reaching for the vodka. It's a level of insanity that nobody can understand unless you've been there. And I'm coming up now to 5 years of being consistently free from addictions. That's a milestone for me. Like I said, I used to go a year at a time. And I think part of that reason that it took me so long was that I was still functional. I managed to hold on to my job, my house, my car, my finances, and I managed to hide my addictions very well. We refer to rock bottom. It's a term that I really dislike a lot, but my rock bottom for me was emotional, it was mental and psychological. So not really the stereotypical rock bottom that many refer to in recovery circles, but it was definitely my rock bottom. And when people in 12 steps refer to spiritual awakening or enlightenment, I can't remember the phrase used, but that really used to piss me off because I believed for a long time that it was an unachievable bar set up by 12-step programs that really only served to discourage people who could not acquire this God consciousness. And I was one of them. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic and indoctrinated very young. And I remember when I was 11 years old and I said to my father, we had to go to Mass every Sunday. And on the way home one day, I was 11 and I said, Dad, and I had gotten kicked out of catechism class actually too for asking too many questions. So I was a bit of a black sheep in the family early on. And I said, I don't believe anything that I'm listening to and I don't want to go anymore. And he said, he was a single dad at the time. And it was amazing that he did what he did. He was an extraordinary man. He said, well, that is a pretty big decision. So I'm going to make a compromise with you because I'm going to have to answer to the family for you not joining us for Mass. So he said, in that hour, I want you, because he had this Britannica encyclopedia set. And he said, I want you to look up one other religion of the world and we'll have a discussion about it when I get back from Mass. So that's what we did. And it was a really good experience for me. So the whole God consciousness thing for me was a real sticking point in 12-step programs. And sometimes it still can be a jagged pill for me to swallow. I still won't call myself an alcoholic or an addict because labels belong on food, not people. When it's my turn to share, I say, hi, I'm Tanya. I'm grateful to be here. For me, that's good enough. But I've grown to realize that as long as I continue to exert consistent and persistent efforts to help myself, my enlightenment, my spiritual enlightenment has come in the form of profound alteration to how I react to life's adversities. That's my enlightenment.
Bob?
I love what you just said, Tanya. I really do. And I think it's the exact reason that we're sitting here tonight and doing this discussion. AA was not the way for Tanya. And you gave it a full shot. You gave it 100%. You went in and that was your experience. And you know what? AA has never and is not today ever saying that AA is the only way to get sober. They're just saying we are one way. And if you want to go to another way, then that's okay. When we get into that, yes, you have to have a higher power. And yes, there is God in what is in, in the 12 steps. It's in the third step. But the rest of the steps don't have God or higher power in number 2 and God in number 3. And do I have a higher power? You betcha. Do I call it God on occasion? You betcha. But my higher power is not God. You guys know my history. I was sexually abused by a Catholic priest when I was a kid. And if you think I'm coming into a 12-step program and starting to profess all the religion side of the thing, I am incapable of doing that. I am incapable of going into a Catholic church for Mass. I have tried it just recently within the last couple of months, and I cannot do it. Part of that trauma is still there. So what is my higher power then? What is it I use? And you know what I use? It's sitting down, and the energy that happens when I sit down and start to talk to another alcoholic, there is an energy. Or if I'm in a good meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're talking solution and we're talking spiritual experience and what that means, which I said earlier, isn't religion, isn't seeing the burning bush. It's about that change in how I'm viewing myself in this world and my interaction with you and all of that takes place, a lot of which, very, very efficiently Tanya deals with within Red Roof. And that's essential. And yeah, there's parallels all over the place. And there's things that are commonalities and everything is connected. But my energy comes from that interaction with the others. In some senses, right here, right now, with 2 other people on the program who are in recovery, there's an energy there that I don't see any one of us individually or us as a group can create. And that is the thing. I can't individually do that. So that's a power greater than me. And that's the kind of thing I have to rely on. Are there specifics? And what does it do for me in my regular life and what goes on in day-to-day life? Yeah, I've been sober for 12 years, a little over 12 years now. I have not relapsed. I just love this program. That's the way I went. I wouldn't be right in the cognitive side of it. Great. I'm glad Tanya's there, and I love what John does in this stuff. And if it's not about who can sell to get the person in, it's about how can you get better? How can you stop worshiping that thing which is killing you and not even see it? And how can myself as an alcoholic help another alcoholic? Because in order for me to stay sober, I got to be working with another alcoholic. And I do. And that's where I find that energy and that higher power that exists in that relationship. Within the book itself, within the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a chapter called We Agnostic. There's agnostic meetings that take place. There's 12 agnostic steps for those agnostic meetings. And so there is various ways, but I get it. I understand it. And if it's not right for the person, then yeah, let's see if we can find something better. I have somebody right now I was going to talk to Tanya about, because I think they're best suited right now, and they've been sober 3 weeks, for a maybe a Red Roof situation. So we could work together and really help whoever's out there, in my thoughts.
Now, you both, well, all 3 of you have mentioned rock bottom, and I'm with you, Tanya. I'm not a big fan of the term rock bottom, so I say pivot point. So I'm going to pivot to pivot point. So point of impact, sorry. Point of impact is what I say. There's a point of impact. In my life, there was a point of impact that made me want to make a change. Now, is that necessary for someone who is addicted to a substance? Do they have to hit that point of impact before they can change? Do you think that that's like, otherwise they can't move forward because they haven't fully accepted the depth of what they're in, what they're doing to themselves? Or do you think that they can see it clearly and still, find that 12 step, find that cognitive behavioral therapy, and be able to move forward and be successful. John?
Boy, it's sorry. I've been sitting here patiently waiting for something to say, something important to say. And I think that really in recovery, there is no one size fits all. There is no, do you have to hit rock bottom? I don't buy into that. I also have a challenge. I'm also challenged when I recognize that, some of the higher power concepts, I mean, when we talk about God, and I don't mean to be offensive to anyone, but when we talk about God, like, who's to say God's a man? Maybe God's a woman. Maybe it's, we need to be autonomous, except in matters affecting the fellowship as a whole. But, we need to allow people the option of there is no one size fits all. There is no, James, you made a reference earlier, and I'm still I want to pull back to that concept of minimizing your food addiction, because it is important, and it may manifest itself in different ways. I also wonder about maturity, how much maturity plays a role. I mean, I'm a much different person than I was. I've been around a little while, and in the time that I've been here, I remember being diligent and following the 12-step protocol religiously. Then I remember pushing back, and as I'm more moderate, but I think about people I know that have been, atheists, for example, come to mind, that are really pushing back. What I attempt to do, my own personal belief, and I'm not going to share what I believe because it's none of your business. It's nobody's business what I believe. But what is important is that I respect Bob, Tanya, James, and Patrick for your belief systems, whatever they may be. So I think it's important that we adopt a philosophy of allowing and accepting people. Today I sat with an indigenous man and a Muslim man. And it was quite amazing when I sat and reflected on the cultural differences between us. Being a European settler, it's like, wow, this is mind-blowing. I am able to sit here. I'm able to sit and digest the concepts. I wanted to just kind of throw it a little bit back to Tanya and Bob. I see, and I also wanted to talk about smart recovery, because there's a myriad of different approaches to recovery that if you can't find a way, and I always think about the person that's sitting on the fence and struggling with whatever they're hearing. You don't, I think there's some great cliches in the 12-step fellowship that, fake it till you make it. I think that's a good one, and so I just hope that people give themselves a fighting chance to find whatever works for them, and not succumb to the powers that be, because the powers that be are ruthless. They result in death, institutions. I mean, then there's some things that are not lies, and I've watched this disease take too many people that I care about and love, because they've died because of the affliction, and because they got lost along the way. So there has to be a way. There has to be approaches that we can take. Bob mentioned a very important conversation, or a very important aspect of his life, that he had been abused by a priest. I too have been sexually abused by a Catholic priest, and that's stuff that needs to be talked about. We need to address these egregious breaches of trust. The countless people have been inflicted are afflicted by these horrendous crimes against humanity, and it is what it is. But we need to start communicating effectively and talking about different approaches. There's harm reduction, there's abstinence, there's CBT, there's so many approaches to recovery. We need to look at them all, and we need to embrace them all. Anyway.
Absolutely, John. I totally agree. Like, as you say, there are so many approaches. There's counseling in general, and there, it's a lot about having a support system. But I was wondering, in cognitive behavioral therapy, is it necessary to have that point of impact? Is it necessary in order to be able to diagnose, not diagnose, that's the wrong word, but to digest, to like go in and find those sources? And you have to hit that point of impact, Tanya.
Absolutely. You need to be ready.
And what does ready mean?
That means, did you hit your rock bottom yet? Are you ready to make the change? That's why interventions don't work. I've never seen an intervention work successfully. If you're not doing it for you, it's not going to work. If you're doing it because you're court ordered or you've been given an ultimatum by a family member, it's not going to work.
Right. So go ahead, Pat.
Sorry, where does trauma? Obviously, the two gentlemen have talked, implicitly about past traumas that they experienced, and how does that? Hopefully, you folks can shed some light on this. How does past trauma lead to these addictive characteristics?
Well, I can just quote Dr. Gabor Mate on that, because he had lived experience on Vancouver's east side, which is reputed to be the most chronically addicted population in North America. And he worked there for 12 years. And he said the common thread among all people who are suffering with an addiction is childhood trauma.
And I think from my experience as well, and, I'm a Gabor Mate fan. I agree with him. There's some aspects of what he says that I would like to have a conversation on. But fundamentally, I agree. Trauma played a huge element, I believe, in my addiction. And then the addiction got so far, man, it wasn't stopping, and it took a hold of me. And that rock bottom, which I like to call a point of clarity or a point of desperation, where this can just not continue this way anymore. And my approach to that was try to take myself out. Try to take the ultimate act, and well, I won't say it that way. That may be taken wrong, but the ultimate act of playing that deity that says your life is over, and I was going to play that, and it takes a lot to get there. And I guess my understanding, I know what happens in 12-step when I come in broken like that, and they have a very specific, precise, clear-cut program of action in 164, really 103 pages, that shows me what to do. I needed that guidance. I needed to be told, go over here, do this, because I did not have a brain that was functioning at that time. And I don't know, Tanya, if Red Roof has that or Cognitive has that or what they have. I don't know. I'm not able to speak to it because I just haven't researched that. But for me, that guidance was there because I did not have the mind of an individual who could make a decision. Let's say I just came into a program and I was in that state, and you said to me, James, okay, Bob, here we have 12-step, and here we got smart recovery, and here we have mindfulness, and over here we got meditation. Which one would you like? Well, at that point, when I just came in, when I hit that point of desperation, when I did, I had a window of opportunity there because my disease was going to be back on me. And fortunately for me, in that moment of clarity, an action was taken and some people were there who then directed me. So it didn't go 5, 6, 7 days when alcohol would have been saying, how you doing, Bobby? I'm still here. Come on back. And I would have listened to it. And I don't know if, and I guess the difficulty I have, Tanya, and hopefully you can help me understand this, is if I come to you in that position, where does cognitive, or if it's through Red Roof, however that should be answered, what do you do with that person? I know in 12-step we have, 1, 2, 3, get them into the work, get them around, make sure they're okay. If they need to go to detox, if they need to see a doctor, make sure we balance them off, because we need the brain kind of cleared before we can do any work. I think we'd all agree with that. But Tanya, can you help me understand what would happen in the cognitive side of this, as opposed to what would happen with a newcomer that walks in the door of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting?
I think being ready. So I just had a client who spent 1 week with me, and he had been to a 42-day treatment facility, and left after 3 days because he said, it's just not working for me. Well, it's pretty hard to tell if something's working for you after 3 days. However, he wanted to try something different, and I did my best in the 1 week. So 1 week recovery, people think I'm a bit crazy with this whole concept of 1 week recovery. And I think it could revolutionize the addiction recovery horizon if we let it, if we really administer it properly, because there's a lot that can be done in a one-on-one immersive situation with someone who's ready, but you need to be ready. And what I have shown in 1 week, I developed this program for me. It was a perfect program for me. I didn't want to announce to my colleagues that I was challenged with addictions. I wanted to, be able to sneak away for a week and tell everybody I was on a vacation, go and deal with it. Give me 1 week, a program that I can follow, a plan. I need a plan to go back into my life and function. And you can do it in 1 week if you're ready to do it, and if you're ready to make the persistent and consistent efforts to help yourself. And I think a lot of it has to do with the first place I go to is self-love and self-care, because most of us have been socially conditioned to believe that we're supposed to just produce and perform. We're here to serve others. This life is not about you. It's about what you can do for others. We're still working in this Calvinist work ethic that we are what we do. If you're not productive, you're worthless. So the first thing I help people get to a place where they can care enough about themselves to do the work, because that was a turning point for me. Actually learning to love myself enough to do the work and see it through and really nurture that healing within myself, to heal that child that was dying within me. So
Tanya, there's a huge piece there that I want to touch on, because you talk about stigma and you're talking about the people around you, your business associates, your friends, your employees, all of the, like, addiction is crossing so many different gamuts. And one of the ones that I could see, and you and I have talked before when we did our past interview, and I talked about professionals. You're a police officer, you are a lawyer, a judge, all these sorts of things. They are afflicted by these addictions. And to leave your job, and the first thing that comes to mind with me is, we are now premising this under mental health. So if you are a police officer and you're carrying a gun on your hip and you're walking around with now a mental health issue, are you putting yourself into a position where the 1 week where you can get away, you can do this somewhat discreetly? Are you putting yourself in a position where you're potentially being passed over for a promotion? Are you seen as a liability to your service? All of these things go into maybe not today. I might be at my, pivot point. However, I can't take the chance that someone's going to find out about this and go from there. What do you folks think about that?
So,
John?
I would like to say that I did not hit a rock bottom. Now, some may scoff at that. I lived there. I lived there for a very long time.
Yeah.
I lived where most people played forever. So, because of my trauma, I lived addiction for probably 30 years. And when I stopped, it was through so I'm a bit of a bastardization of a multitude of approaches. without 12 initially I started in Bob's fellowship, and then I drifted to Narcotics Anonymous, and it was effective for me because I learned how to like myself a bit, and acceptance was critical. So I took one thought each week, and I digested that. But I really wanted to. What I really wanted to say is that I didn't hit a rock bottom. I mean, there was no place where I was totally screwed up and messed up, and well, there may have been. I just was so screwed up that I lived the way I had lived for 35, 40 years. So I'd lived my life that way for a long, long time. And when I stopped, it was about, it wasn't about hitting a rock bottom, as I lived there. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say.
It's interesting. You all have said a big part of this is loving yourself. And in the food addiction that I was dealing with, a big part of it was looking in the mirror and not hearing the words of you big fat so garbage gut, you're a low life, and replacing that with a different internal voice, a voice that was like, you can do this, and you are unique, and you are a good person, and you do these things that are helpful for other people. Is there a piece to that in the other kinds of addictions? Is it important to do you have those voices in your head that tell you what? And is it important to change those somehow and give yourself a new set of tools, Tanya?
Yeah, I like to use the catch it, check it, change it. Right, awareness is the first step, I think, to progress. So when we can notice those thought patterns that are not serving us, and that's catching it. And then we check it. So we actually write it down, write that thought down and examine it and how it makes you feel. I think a problem well defined is half solved. So if we can be really specific around how we're feeling and what are the thoughts that we're having and the emotions and how it's making us feel, it's really a great step toward the healing and changing it, so we can come up with something that's more helpful. I just had a client who was writing down some thoughts. She was a relapser, and I can certainly relate to that because I relapsed every year for 8 years. And I said, rather than beat ourselves up for the setbacks, think of it as an athlete. You know, when they're trying to do when they're at the starting line to do a sprint, right? They have to go back before they move forward. They have to get that little push to propel them forward. So I said, think of it like that. Instead of a failure, it's a setback. So it's a little step back, but it's propelling you. It's springboarding you into a new future. So we can't go back to create a brand new past, but we can start from today to create a brand new future. So let's just focus on what's within our control right now. We can look at our thought patterns, we can catch it, check it, and change it to something that's serving us better. And looking for the evidence when you have had success before. And that self-love, putting yourself first, it's especially hard for parents because, you know, their whole purpose in life was with their children is to provide and perform for their children. So to even suggest to a parent that they put themselves first, it's a hard concept to grasp. And I use the airplane analogy, you know, when we're flying in that metal tube, and if the cabin pressure changes and the oxygen mask falls down in front of you, even if your child is sitting beside you, your instruction is clear. You need to put the mask on yourself first. You need to save yourself before you can save anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that was another piece that I had to deal with, that I couldn't do everything, that at some point I had to slow down and take care of myself a little bit, so that a big fear of mine was that I wasn't going to be around for when my grandkids were born. My parents died before my kids were born themselves, so they didn't get to enjoy that piece of my family. And so that was a big worry of mine that I had to come to terms with. So I was constantly thinking of them instead of myself, and trying to put them ahead of me and putting them before me and making sure that but at the same time, I was ignoring my own needs. And that's a really tough thing for a parent to digest, to figure out that it is okay to think about yourself once in a while. You don't have to do it all the time, but it is okay to take a break. It is okay to take a night off. I have friends that are like, I can't have a babysitter. Are you kidding? And I'm like, no, you have to. You have to. You will be a far better parent if you take a night off than you will be if you think that you can control everything and every day for that child. You just have to find the right babysitter and you'll feel safe. But Bob, I see you're itching to say something.
Geez, you know me too well, James. After 12 years in recovery, 11 of those years really working diligently with hundreds of alcoholics, a few drug addicts, but I am not a drug addict. It has not been my experience that recovery can happen in 1 week. I would love to see it, and I would love to know more about it, but it and it's not something that has to take forever. Like I would walk somebody through these steps in probably 8 weeks, and we'd be through the 12 steps. A spiritual experience or a change of how I'm thinking, that 180 turn thing would have happened. And then we can go back and look at it in a deeper fashion and a deeper dive into the program. My problem was not that I didn't love myself. My problem was I loved myself too much. And one of the things that this program says is the root of my problem is that I'm selfish and self-centered. And for me, that's true. That is the absolute truth. And so around me, I just did whatever I wanted. And once I started with alcohol, and it was not my problem, it was my solution. So you come to me and you say, Bob, you're drinking too much. You got to cut it back. Why don't you moderate? I haven't got the ability to do it. And you ask me to stop. That's like saying tear off my arm, because I have no way of doing it. And I have no way of, or I don't even see that I have a problem. I'm completely blind to it. And what happens then is, as I was continuing to hurt the people around me, my wives, my children, my family, my brothers, my sisters, I'm now living in that guilt and shame. And I got that incessant chatter of 1,000 monkeys going on in my head, and I can't get rid of it. And the only thing that stops that is at the back end of a drink. And then I can breathe, and I don't get it, but I can't stop it. And for me, the biggest factor in this, with all due respect to my colleagues, is not about loving myself, man. That's going to come, whether it's from Red Roof Recovery or cognitive therapy or 12-step or whatever the person who is out there listening to this wants. It's about getting a relationship with yourself and having respect with yourself, which then flows into the love aspect. But when I came in, I needed this stuff that would kick my butt and tell me with no uncertain term, people who are going to step on my toes rather than my grave, and tell me, that I don't want to use the phrase hard love, but if you don't know the program, that's as close as I could get. But this 12-step recovery will walk me through it and give me a way to look at especially three things: my resentments, which are the number one reason that people relapse. And then I have to look at my fears and where I, as an individual, are trying to fix those fears. And I just can't do it in the way I was doing it. And then I have to look at my sex conduct and personal relationships. I never had, I didn't know how to do it. And where does the trauma side come over and just be alcoholic come over? Man, that's a very vague way to go. But I think it's really important to see that it's one alcoholic talking to another. And the essence of this program is that lived experience. This book, which is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, was written by the first 100 drunks. And their experience, not their theories, it's their experience. And I'm not saying cognitive therapy is the theory. It's not. But I'm saying their experience of when they relapsed and came back in the 30s and said, I'm going to be your sponsor now. And when I get drunk, this guy's going to be your sponsor. That's the way it went. Because 6 months, you were a long timer at that point. And that essence of me hearing somebody who's walked that road. We all have had that experience in our life. Somebody who's walked the same road as us, somebody else who had an eating disorder, James. And I know Patrick's perfect. I don't have to say anything there. But
Hell,
Oh, no, he's
be
not.
able to hear somebody else and then they walk you through that process is exactly what I needed. And that's exactly what I put into the charity and RSI and what we're doing now. We need the clinical side. Absolutely. I'm not saying no to that. Absolutely. We need the cognitive. Absolutely. We need trauma counseling. But this lived experience and the process that I have experienced in through 12-step for the reasons I've outlined was the path that I found I had to take.
I think we should let Tanya respond. I don't think that she is suggesting that a week you're fixed. I don't think she's suggesting that at all from talking to her, but I think you should respond to that and explain a little bit further on that, what your idea of the week is. Because I think it was misunderstood.
And I don't like the term fixed. We're not broken.
Sorry.
But we
You're
do
right.
require healing.
I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah. And you know, there's a lot of things about 12 steps that are unhelpful. It's shame-based. There's a lot of self-flagellation, a lot of labeling. You know, to say that a book is written by 100 drunks is unhelpful. It's stigmatizing. These were people who were challenged by a substance use disorder. You know, we've got lots of evidence now showing that the reasons the stigma is perpetuated is because of language. Language feeds attitudes in society. And it was best demonstrated in a clinical outcome study done in an emergency room setting, whereas a hypothetical patient was introduced to the emergency room clinicians as a substance abuser. And then they were polled afterward to ask what their opinion was of this patient. And they all collectively said that he was culpable, totally responsible for his behavior, and deserved criminal punishment if required. And then weeks later, the same group of clinicians was introduced to this same fictitious hypothetical patient. This time, however, he was introduced as having substance use disorder. And then when they were polled, collectively, all of these clinicians said, oh yes, he can fully recover with a combination of therapy and drugs, medically assisted treatment. So that's the difference of how we're using our language. And I always encourage people to stop labeling yourself as an alcoholic or an addict or a druggie or a drunk or a junkie or a loser. It's unhelpful. It's sending the wrong message to your brain. The whole idea of cognitive therapy is to retrain your brain to serve you in healthier ways.
Bob, would you like to respond?
I'm going to let it go.
Well, so again, I think that we've talked about this a few times, is that there's very different viewpoints in how we do this, but it all comes down to the individual. I know John has really implored that, and even before we talked here. And when Tanya put something together, and we're talking about the stigmas, and I kind of want to go back to that a little bit, because Tanya's idea and what she's putting together with the 7 days, I think fits into people's lifestyle. And I know that that's what we're trying to pattern away from, is that the lifestyle of current. But when I think of, you know, the mayor of the city who's got a problem that needs some help with, where can they go? For them to go down and sit down to a meeting and to disclose that in a very public outing is very hard to do. And I understand, Bob and John, you probably have some notes about that and viewpoints on that you have to. But it would be something that I think a lot of people would be hesitant about, and it was probably leading to a lot of people that aren't willing to get help. So how does the STEP programs handle that? John, go ahead, Bob.
Well, you know, I want to start off by saying I know, and I think Bob knows him as well, a pretty affluent lawyer that actually engages with the 12-step approach, and he does it well. But I also want to rain on Bob's parade a little bit, because AA, I'm hearing buzzwords of AA and NA joining forces. So you heard it here first. You know, that's I was at an
What's NA?
Ontario
I'm sorry,
regional.
I'm not aware.
Narcotics Anonymous.
Oh, okay. Right.
Our Ontario Regional Convention of Narcotics Anonymous. When I was at the fellowship or the congregation this week, there was conversations about the joining of the forces. And I don't know personally. I believe that addiction has various hats, and whether you're an alcoholic or you're an addict or you believe in cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever approach works for you, there is no one size fits all.
So, John, I'm going to push back a little bit on you there, because one of the first things that you said there was a very affluent lawyer. And the first thing I go to is that we're talking about him because it doesn't feel like he should be there, right? Like that's the viewpoint. That's what I'm taking from your point there. So what I'm saying is that this stigma that goes along with certain open forums, and Bob, I'm 100% with you. I think it's a critical piece to this. And what do I know? But I do think that there's a place for the Red Roof recovery aspect with that closed personal viewpoint that's very, and again, I go back, I got a lot of friends that are, professionals in law enforcement, in medical community, and all of these things. And they would have a very tough time sitting down and doing a 12-step meeting because you don't know who's there. You don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know what relationships you might have had with these individuals in the past. And I'm not saying that's the world of this, but that stigma, to be able to go away to a 7-day program to get that core fundamental belief structure established and then go from there.
So that person, Patrick, would fall into a certain percentage or a certain percentile. So for them, that the Red Roof recovery approach could be very effective. Right. Whereas the affluent lawyer that I'm referring to, and I don't say that as much as I know him very well personally, sure. And it always blows me away that he reduced, and I think this is important to take away from this. He reduced himself to our level to be healed, because and he's a bit of a 12-step aficionado now because he's pretty caught up in the process. So I think it's important to recognize that there is no one size fits all. So
you got reactions from everybody on that one. Yeah,
I think
I'm going to start with Bob, and then I'm going to go to Tanya, and then we'll go from there. Bob, what do you think in rebuttal?
On the NAAA joining, I've never heard of that, John, with all due respect, and I don't see how it could happen with the primary purpose within the traditions. The second thing, as far as I would have a completely take on him bringing himself to our level, in that this disease, it doesn't know social barriers. It doesn't know your bank account. It doesn't know your religion, your race, your creed. It doesn't care if you're male or female or transgendered or queer or lesbian or gay. It doesn't care. All it wants, my disease, all it wants is it wants me dead. It'll settle for me drunk, but it really would like me dead. And that's what this does. You take a look at celebrities that are out there who have all the money in the world, and it can't keep them sober. And it's not just about being sober, but it's about being sober and being happy about it. And is there a place for AA and Red Roof and all of the other modalities to exist? Absolutely. I just don't understand it. And I think there's areas where I really have some difficulty, and I would love to have the debate, but I don't think that in this format or in this place and time. But I need to learn that. And I'm not coming at it to say this is right and that is wrong. Show me how 7 days could work, because I'm going to get on that bandwagon and I'm rocking it all the way down to the detox center. And show me how it is. But I also have to find my truth. 12-step recovery taught me I had to find my truth. And was I a real alcoholic? And through that process, I can take an alcoholic and in the first meeting with that alcoholic in 15 minutes, really find out your truth. Are you a real alcoholic? Are you a hard drinker? I won't even put in social drinker there because that doesn't apply by the time they get to my seats. But there's a definite difference that I could be in a social situation where I look really like an alcoholic. I'm in more drunk tanks and I'm going to more courts and I've had more DUIs and license suspensions and maybe even treatment centers. And I look like a real alcoholic. But my truth is, I'm a hard drinker. And when we really start to look at it, that's where I see, I'll get in trouble for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. That's where I see the cognitive therapy and that modality working from my experience. For the real alcoholic, when they're first starting off, I just don't see how, with bringing my mind to that type of concept, I don't see how it would have worked for me. So I'm not saying it's wrong, and maybe it's working great. I don't have the experience in it, but I know there is a very specific, precise, clear-cut program for the guy just coming out of detox, coming out of the treatment program. Which the other thing is, our province right now does not fund treatment centers that have 12-step based programs. They will not fund them. And there's a whole thing behind it. And I know part of it. I don't know all of it. All I know is people who work in the industry are telling me if they're 12-step, they don't do it. They have to do 12-step kind of under the table. And I find that very discouraging as a province, that they're going to take one modality of recovery and say, no, that's no good because of the fear of maybe a religious or a cult or a God thing. And they don't understand it. And people are making decisions on funding that people could be getting the treatment they need for that. So, we talk about where does it stand and where the stigma is. Certainly there's stigma. I've worked with military, I've worked with police, I've worked with paramedics, and they have their own meetings. So they need anonymity. The OPP and the RCMP and the local police, they need their anonymity. So they have meetings where it's just uniformed professionals. And that could be military, that could be RCMP, that could be anything. And that is held. Politicians, all of these areas where you need that anonymity. I choose to break my anonymity. I choose to be here tonight and say I'm an alcoholic. But I have the right to not do that and just say I'm Bob M and I'm an alcoholic. And for me, I don't see that as a label that is degrading in any way. Two things in my life that were the worst things that ever happened in my life are the two biggest assets. Because I'm an alcoholic, I get to work with other men, especially, and see that progress go through. And, with the sex abuse, the same thing. That is my biggest asset now. So I don't see it as a label, as a stigma. I understand what you're saying, but for me personally, I don't take it that way.
Tanya.
Well, definitely the societal stigma still exists. And, we have adopted a modality that doesn't work. And we're spending tens of millions of dollars as taxpayers, allowing governments to put money into institutions that are not having any success. There's no accountability whatsoever. My client is going back to this same treatment facility for the third time this year. That should not be allowed to happen on the tax ticket. It just shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it's happening all the time. And taxpayers are letting it happen. We have adopted this modality. It is old school. It is born from the days of military personnel who were suffering with alcoholism, and the only place they could go for help was a hospital. And the hospital wanted them there for an extended period of time, and they could only get 28 days off in a row. Hence, the model was created, a 28-day program in a hospital for recovery from alcohol addiction. And we haven't evolved from that. It's old. We need to get beyond it. It's not working. There is zero evidence that it's working. Maybe 1%, if we're lucky, are coming out of those treatment facilities after they're just extending the time now. You can stay for 90 days and it's still not working. But we're still throwing tens of millions of dollars at these programs that don't work. Can you get recovery in 1 week? You can get a foundation, a plan, a program, and lifetime aftercare. That's what I provide, and it works when you work it.
Bob, you raise your hand there.
Yeah, I have a problem with treatment centers too, Tanya. But those treatment centers aren't using 12-step anymore. They were at one point, but they are not now because they can't or they won't get their funding.
So, just, Bob, if I can, your funding models that you're seeing right now with the treatment centers that are there, the things that I've heard, it's like a 30-day program. Am I wrong in saying that? That tends to be
30,
like the 28,
35,
30.
40, 45. There's varying styles.
Now, so those beds are provided through OHIP in Ontario here?
There are some beds that are for some beds at some treatment. It's become its own industry now, and people are making a lot of money off of this stuff. I'm not shooting that at Tanya. I'm talking the big treatment centers that are processing them through, like, grinding them out like hamburger, I like to say, in that kind of situation. And it's just a money deal, and they're putting all of these addictions together, and that's not necessarily the best, in my humble opinion. But the funding for this now, and the way that it goes, to my understanding, and I may be wrong, maybe my colleagues know better, but the ministry is giving CAMH the money, and CAMH then distributes it out to the treatment centers around the province of Ontario. And if you have a 12-step base program, you do not get funding, and therefore you cannot have an OHIP bed, so it's all private pay. Private pay right now, I've heard everywhere from $14,000, $15,000 up to $25,000. Then you got the rich group that can go even higher than that. It's insane. But at the same point in time, now 12-step funding places cannot do it. They have to have harm reduction. They have smart recovery is in a lot of the treatment facilities now. And if they're doing 12-step, it's almost like it has to be done, under the rug or quietly in the back by those treatment centers, or else they won't get their money. And I have a problem with that. It's you can walk into any AA meeting and get the same thing, but I think we're missing an opportunity in addition to smart recovery and the other modalities that we have in our current treatment facilities. And I think our government right now, it's an outside issue, as we say in the 12-step program, but right now, people who want to go and have a 12-step, if that's their option, they cannot get into a treatment center. Fundamentally, the best thing for that is that you get distance between the using, and if you're there for 30 days, now you're off your substance of no choice. For 30 days, now we can start into the work and do it because you got some distance behind your last drink. So that's one of the nuts in my craw that I have on the funding.
Tanya?
Not to mention, they also provide nicotine patches. So when you go into these facilities, right? Yeah, you're not only going to stop drinking and drugging, you're not allowed to smoke either. It's absolutely absurd.
There's a question there, if I might. Sorry, Bob, to cut you off, and we'll hopefully come back to that. But we are looking at an opioid, crisis in North America right now, and we're looking at a situation in which younger and younger and younger people are maybe substituting alcohol in their daily life and their addictions for life ending, like critical life ending. One episode of this. Are we seeing, like John had brought up, NA being overwhelmed with individuals, or are we just not seeing it?
I don't have experience in NA, so I can't answer that.
Yeah. I want to come back. Bob made reference to he doesn't see NA and AA perhaps morphing together as a unit. I don't know. I think that stranger things have happened.
Can you tell me why? We don't understand the differences. We don't understand the organizational structures. Why would there be no way, or why would there be a way that two separate organizations would come together? We're talking about addictions. It would make sense if you're able to do everything in house. Maybe Bob, John, why would there and why wouldn't there be?
You want it first, John?
Well, I think I'd prefer to respond to you, Bob, because you are such an eloquent speaker.
I will take it. I call it the identification. If I go into an NA meeting and I am not an alcoholic, and I know that because I qualified myself as an alcoholic, and I tried to qualify myself as an addict, and I am not an addict. And I won't waste your time going into how I do that, but it's very clear and precise. I do not get, that would be like me going to an overeaters meeting. I can't identify with what you're saying to me. and with, trying to be a little lighthearted here, a little bit, like, just, push yourself back from the table. That's like you saying, Bob, just push yourself back from the drink. I can't do it. And you can't do it. And I have to respect that. But I can't identify with that. I can identify. I come into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can be listening to somebody I have never met before in my life, and I can identify with them and know exactly almost what their next statement is going to be when it comes to their addiction. With a drug addict, and there's a definite difference. An addiction is not an addiction, is an addiction. That is not my belief. Alcoholism and drug addiction are two separate things. Drug addiction will take you downtown a lot quicker and will kill you a lot quicker than alcohol will, and I'm an example of that. I got sober at 58 years of age. I'm 71 now. If I would have been doing cocaine and heroin in addition to alcohol, and I was a pretty stupid alcoholic because I didn't know that it would help me drink more if I did cocaine. If I would have known that, again, I wouldn't be here. But I would not be alive. I cannot do drugs the way I drank. And I'm hearing that from drug addicts who are also alcoholics. But they started the drugs later, and they're getting sober and they're getting cleaner sooner than that. So the reason for that is you have a specific fellowship that identifies and has a primary purpose. And my primary purpose is to work with the alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous, and to work with people with drug problems in NA, and to work with people with cocaine problems in CA, in Cocaine Anonymous. Sure. And that's why we separate those things within the 12-step fellowships. So when I come in, I learn a lot from cocaine addicts and drug addicts, a ton, man. A lot of them are my mentors, but I can't identify with them. And I can understand and I can compare, but identification, that gift of identification, is vital to my recovery and getting into recovery.
John.
Over to you, John.
Well, there you go. So I'm going to push back a little bit strenuously on you, Bob.
Good, I like it.
And I think, for me, alcohol is a drug, period. So I don't differentiate between alcohol or any other substances. What I did and how I behaved, whether ultimately, when I stopped using, my drug of choice, my DOC, was alcohol. So I actually tried to be socially acceptable and drink rather than use substances. I'm a meth addict, so I love methamphetamine. It makes me crazy. But I like a lot of other things too. And I don't know that there's a differentiation between substances. I don't get, when I hear you say I don't identify, well, I can identify with you, Bob. I mean, I know what it's like to get pissed up and puke in my galoshes. I know that feeling all too well. I know it sadly and tragically, but I also know I don't know. I don't have a lot of I was at a conference many years ago, in an AA conference, and I remember the speaker that in the room I was at, and I raised the issue, and it, not unlike today, I raised the issue that alcoholics, I don't believe in the riverbank alcoholics. I don't think that they're something that we see many of today.
What's a riverbank alcoholic?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think a riverbank alcoholic is somebody that grabs a Mickey and heads down to the river and just and
in the rooms we call it
relies on alcohol. Many alcoholics today use different substances. Whatever gets you through the night.
Yeah, that's true.
So whatever gets you through the night, alcoholics may use other substances. So I don't know that there's a peer, and it is my hope that the 12-step modality learns to embrace different clicks, if you will.
So
Yeah.
Tanya, you again, kind of going back to what it is that it seems like Bob and John are talking a little bit more in regards to, you know, the personal view of the group of what they were discussing here. How does the cognitive behavioral side kind of bring into that, and what does that look like?
An addiction is an addiction is an addiction.
That does seem like the way that you're framing that is that, you know, it's the way you're thinking.
Yeah, and whether you're taking meth, heroin, cocaine, opioids, marijuana, alcohol, you're doing it to give yourself comfort that you can't get without the substance or behavior. And it's tickling the same part of the brain regardless of what you're doing to get that comfort.
I think I'm really sorry. I think we could talk and talk and talk. We're at an hour and 26 minutes. You guys have given us a lot of information to digest. And I think anyone who's out there that may be suffering or is in need of help, you definitely could reach out to these people. You can reach out to Bob from Recovery Speaking Initiative, which is online. They're on Facebook, and they also have a website. Or Red Roof Recovery. She's on Instagram, Facebook, you name it, she's on it. And she also has a website as well. I think this would be a good time. And I always try to help that one person out there that's hurting, that needs support. And I think I'm a big fan of the Starfish story. Look it up. And I think if you can help one person, then it's worth your day. And I was wondering if each of you could tell me what's the one thing that you think someone who's struggling with addiction needs to know, or what do you think would help them? Any piece of advice, any thought that you think would be important to them. And while you think of that, I'll talk about it next week. Next Thursday, we're going to have Brian. He's from I can't pronounce this, but Achilles, Canada. So we had a lovely young lady who was blind, and she was an ultra runner, ran in some very dangerous situations, not dangerous situations, but she ran the Berry Trail, which on one side was a cliff. That's why I say dangerous situation. Wonderful person. Well, the Achilles organization are the people that help those people find people that will assist them to achieve their sports goals and other goals like that. He's coming next week. He's going to chat to us about his organization and what he does. And I think it's going to be just a marvelous chat. So I hope you join us. I really do think that what we were talking about is super important. They're all, like John said, there are all kinds of addictions. And I do appreciate that he said that I was belittling myself a little bit. And I do agree. I just sometimes, you know what, I just feel like some of those bigger addictions, it's hard for me to say, oh, I had a food addiction when someone's addicted to heroin. If you know what I mean. I think people, it just makes me feel like I'm belittling them. So I kind of keep that to myself, but I think it's an important conversation. And if you are out there right now and you're addicted on something, it's hurting your life. And I'm going to tell you right now, anything you're addicted to is hurting your life, whether it's being a neat freak. If you're addicted to having everything in your life organized, it's hurting your life. And you should reach out, get some help. It is one of those things that is very hard to do alone. And I think it's important that you seek, even like Bob said, someone who's going through it is helpful, or a wonderful organization like Red Roof, where they can give you the steps to get there. All of these things are important, and I love you all out there. So let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls together. Pat, let's give them a little bit more time.
Yeah, well, no, I want to thank each and every one of you. We've interviewed all of you. We know your stories. We know the triumphs you guys have all done in the ladder, and it's pretty awesome to sit here, be able to put this together, do an hour and a half presentation for, like James is saying, the starfishes out there. That one person that just needs that little motivation or that little idea that maybe sparks something down the road. So I want to thank you folks. As always, we've got another great guest coming up next week with Achilles Canada. It's going to be fantastic. Check us out. And why don't we start with Bob, John, and Swales, and just a note to the people out there, and then we'll leave off on that. As always, folks, let's make some money together. Bob?
If you're out there right now and you're going through that incredible pain that addiction has, please remember that total annihilation of how you see your life right now does not have to be permanent. There is a gate you can come through. And that hopeless state of mind and body that you're experiencing, again, there is a way out. And whether that's through a 12-step, whether that's through cognitive, whatever it is you need, please have the courage to ask that first person for help. You're with it. And we just want you safe, and we want you better, regardless of the modality. Come on out, join us.
John?
I think that what's important to acknowledge and recognize is that we all have a great respect for each other, all three of us, and all five of us actually. So I think that as heated and tempestuous as this journey or this conversation may have appeared, that's not the case. If you are struggling tonight or at any night, at any point, do not use no matter what, and get some support. Find somebody to talk to. Somebody like Tanya, somebody like Bob, whatever. Just don't sit in isolation and do it alone. That's all.
You have to do it by yourself, but you don't have to do it alone. Getting to a place of unconditional acceptance for yourself, others, and life, I think is key. The key, my favorite acronym, keep educating yourself to find what works for you. Certainly the unconditional acceptance piece is the hammer in my toolbox for sure. I practice that every day. And I did a little rejig to the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me.
How can you leave it any better than that, folks?